Well, at each of our programs to this point, we have had a focus on a particularly important public policy issue. And I'm very pleased to say this will be no exception to that. It is the 5G competition with China. And for those of you who've been tracking these issues, we want to make sure that you check out the really remarkable array of insights and assessments of both the stakes involved and the way ahead that has been provided by our previous speakers. You can find the videos at presentdangerchina.org. Today we have the privilege of being addressed by a man who has been working in this space and, among others, on strategic technologies as an investor, seeking to try to help our country compete successfully against China and ensure that we actually prevail, as President Trump has indicated he's committed to doing, in this very high-stakes competition. His name is Andrew Whitney. He is the CEO of Energy Investment Partners. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, everyone. It's terrific to be here. Very grateful to Frank and to Brian, obviously, for the opportunity to talk to you all. I've got a fairly broad task here, which is to try and explain where I think we need to go in this 5G space. But to do that, I think it's really important to establish a baseline of knowledge so that people actually understand the actual significance of this 5G thing. Because what you tend to hear about is a lot of kind of doom and gloom and disaster, and I think it would be a lot easier for people to understand the severity of all this and also the types of decisions we need to make if people had a better understanding of the core issues. So I'm going to talk about kind of background, baseline, what is 5G, because nobody ever really defines that when they talk about it, what the threat is, what the problem is, what I think the solution is, and then what we need in order to get to that solution. 5G can be a tremendous asset. It will be a tremendous asset if it's done correctly. It'll be a great resource for opportunity, quality of life. But in order to realize that benefit, it means not giving it away, giving the future away to networks powered by Chinese equipment. So today I want to cover some core concepts, a little bit of a kind of a decent grounding in all this, and address a communications issue, literally and figuratively, about 5G, because I think you can't expect to understand something that you don't understand the fundamental elements of. So there's that. We're going to talk about the scale of the threat, and we're going to talk about some good news, which I think is a big win for America, allies, and the free world. But we do need decisions. We have to make decisions. The good news is the technology, the finance, and the commercial model is now there, but we have to make decisions. So the baseline here is that you have to make these technologies accessible to people, otherwise they can't possibly make any decisions about them. As Frank said in the introduction, I'm a private equity guy, I'm a technology investor. It's my job to work with really smart technology innovators and make those ideas turn into a commercial reality that's actually functional, viable, works. So that's kind of what I do, and in order to do my job, I have to be fluent in all those dialects of technical, language, if you will. You might call it a dialect of geek, dork, and nerd. You have to be able to speak all these different languages and translate that into something that kind of makes sense to normal people like us. And then also the other thing I want to stress here is that contrary to your typical sort of socialist narrative, as a conservative and a free market capitalist, I'm all about solutions that consider people and ecology and all those other things. The left has done a tremendous job of painting us all into this corner of just being generally bad people. That's not the case. So let's talk very quickly about what is 5G, because if you don't understand this, you've got no hope of understanding the real scale of the problem here. And conservatives, unfortunately, are pretty bad when it comes to understanding a lot of technology concepts. There's lots of people who can't even work email still. It's remarkable. And we've got to pick up a game on that, otherwise, we'll get beaten every time. The problem you have with 5G is you'll hear lots and lots of buzzwords all the time, things that you don't understand at all, and then you'll basically let the whole thing wash over you because you're kind of lost at the beginning. You'll hear about peak data rate, user experience data rate, latency. You'll hear about that all the time. Network energy efficiency, mobility, connection density, all these things, and it's just kind of flying over your head, and at this point you glaze over. In practical terms, what does 5G really mean? It's things like enhanced mobile virtual reality and augmented reality. That's not just about playing Pokemon Go. It's about the type of functionality where, as I'm standing here explaining a frequency spectrum, as you look at me, if you held up a device or you were wearing a pair of glasses, you would see a representation floating in front of my face of where all the parts of the spectrum are, and this is additional information that's augmenting your experience of reality. You can do that with 5G. It's things like being able to use combinations of different types of wireless technologies to serve underserved or unserved areas, rural areas, things like that. You can interlace all that stuff when you're talking about 5G technology. It's about ultra reliable, low latency communications. Now again, that sounds like a real mouthful. Why does that matter? Well, it's nice to have nice, clean, clear communication, but it means you can have things like factory automation or remote surgery. Latency is lag, basically. So you can perform an operation at a distance using a robot with zero lag between your inputs and the cutting surface. It's remarkable stuff, but it's only possible with 5G. Enhanced V2X, that's vehicles to anything. Vehicles to pedestrians, vehicles to infrastructure, things in the way, stuff going on, inputs constantly between vehicles, including flying ones. You won't be able to have any flying vehicles until you've got all this kind of communication going on between the vehicle itself and the surroundings and the occupants. You can do that with 5G. And then, of course, the one that everybody hears about, which is massive Internet of Things. So sensors everywhere, sensors all over the place. Networks, smartphones, buildings, smart cities, precision agriculture, sensors everywhere. You can only process that in a 5G environment. So it's a lot more than just, bigger, faster downloads of movies and games. That's the kind of narrative that's pushed at the consumer because they think that's the only thing the consumer's interested in, so that's all you tend to hear about. But 5G, to be clear, it has the power to determine economic success and failure. There is no overstatement of the case. If you doubt that, consider that there are 500,000 counterfeit retailers on Amazon right now that copy the real owner of a business or a piece of IP, clone the product and put the price up there 1 cent lower. So the pricing algorithm in Amazon shows that product top of the list, and that's the one you buy because it was top of the list and it was cheapest. That's happening in real time on Amazon already. Now, if you use 5G to look at the inventory levels in any given region or market in the moment, you can adjust your pricing and destroy anyone else in that space. This is immensely significant. But more than that, it controls power over life and death. And I want you to remember that point because we're going to come back to that. So what are the challenges of 5G? It's basically about management of spectrum, of data and compute, and cost. That's really what it boils down to. Health is not an issue. I can explain that if anyone wants to see me afterwards, but health is not an issue with 5G, even though there's been a narrative push that it is. Very quickly on the subject of spectrum management, you have to understand the difference between wavelength and frequency. So wavelength is the length of a sine wave. Frequency is how often that effectively occurs in a given period of time. Why does this matter? Essentially, the longer wavelength you've got, the further it will travel, but the less carrying capacity it has. The higher the frequency you've got, the more carrying capacity it has, but it won't go so far and it requires a lot more energy to push it. So this means that essentially what you want is the best of both worlds. You want to be in the middle of that spectrum. Well, the issue is that everywhere else in the world, that is where the 5G battle is occurring. But that part of the spectrum, and we're using some simplifications here for expediency, but that part of the spectrum in the US is currently controlled by the Department of Defense. So there's some debate about using a completely different part of the spectrum called millimeter wave, but millimeter wave is much higher frequency. It involves a lot more power use. It involves a lot more frequent towers and implementations, which drives up your network infrastructure cost. So for all of those things, there are issues there. That's just the spectrum piece. So what's the threat? Well, it starts because the way licenses are currently apportioned in effectively every major market is they end up going out to a bid process where the usual suspects come along and they bid up the value of these licenses, and then they get that spectrum. And what that typically results in is you have whole rural areas completely underserved, because obviously to recover that investment in license, the investors focus all their efforts on regional, kind of urban, dense markets where they can recover the most revenue. It means that the prices tend to stay high because it's the same people bidding for the licenses all the time. It means that spectrum's underutilized because they tend to focus it all on certain markets where they'll get the best bang for the buck. And it also means the same operators end up rushing into the welcoming arms of the Chinese, who provide very low-cost network infrastructure equipment. So if you've paid through the nose for the spectrum, then all that's left in your cash kitty is very limited amount of money to pay for your network infrastructure. So the Chinese are exploiting this approach to spectrum provision by providing a product that neatly fits into everybody's available budget. Why would China go to such lengths to do that? Why would you provide such massive subsidy? Well, it's because they understand that the power of these networks and the data is enormous. It'll bestow a power more complete and fungible than any weapon system ever deployed on this planet. You can contextualize this as like in the Marvel Avengers universe, as basically saying it's like Thanos with all 5 Infinity Stones. Basically, it's control over everything. It will allow you to annihilate anybody's commercial position, marginalize anybody's military forces in a given theatre, negate somebody's popular support, and basically crash all of your cars, pacemakers and supply chains. You can do that kind of thing with 5G technology. So I'm not joking when I say it is power over economic futures and even life and death. This is all real. I can walk you through the examples if you want to have them afterwards. I'm just trying to get through some of this stuff. So if you gave me a choice between domination of 5G and unlimited nuclear missiles and other weapons, I'll take 5G all day long. China is a totalitarian communist government that has somewhere between 1 and 3 million people in actual concentration camps, and you can't give those people control of this. They've made it clear they will stop at nothing and see all means as legitimate, including targeting families far in the rear of the battlefield. I mean, this is a Chinese military doctrine book that you've probably all read, Unrestricted Warfare. It makes it absolutely clear that they consider that a legitimate means of warfare. 5G is simply the best tool they could ever have hoped for, and they will not hesitate to use it. These are the same guys from the Great Leap and Tiananmen Square and the one-child policy that we've heard about. They cannot be allowed to dominate 5G. America must have its own secure 5G solution and provide alternative leadership for the free world. The good news is I'm pleased to say that we now can. So if we recap the challenge, it's management of spectrum, data and compute, and cost. You've been told they've got us beat, that we don't even have the technical capability or the skills anymore after years of offshoring, and that we will never muster the capital to roll this out. What if I told you we do in fact have the technology to do this with superior computation power and energy efficiency, and with a totally secure US supply chain and completely cyber and EMP hardened? We actually have that. The spectrum's there. We also have what we believe is a very workable business model for all stakeholders. It's a private sector solution, includes everybody, including the ignored rural folk, reduces costs, and it drives huge benefit for the US economy. What do we need? Timely decisions, not ruled by committee. We need more widespread understanding of what's at stake here, because people don't understand the things that I've just explained to you. They can't possibly understand the severity. And we need more of the same excellent, bold leadership that the White House has been showing with things like the executive orders on secure supply chain and resilience. So it's about decisions and communications. Thanks.
Sure. Question?
Quick question. I was made aware recently that the UK has been having some internal debate about whether or not to use the Chinese firm Huawei for their infrastructure, and that defense people do not want to use it, but Theresa May was overriding them. Now, she's about to be gone, but apparently one guy was even fired for coming out and spilling the beans on it. Do you know anything about that situation?
So,
And whether our intelligence people are concerned if they can work with them and share intelligence?
Are you picking on me because I've got a funny accent? No, it's a good question actually, and it's a terrible thing. Obviously, for the Chinese, picking off the Five Eyes as they're known is a tremendous coup, and Theresa May has apparently gone off on a particular tangent in that regard because the security services over there are quite vehement that they want nothing to do with it. They said the same thing about the Chinese-backed plan to build a nuclear power plant called Hinkley C. And part of the deal there, orchestrated by the former Prime Minister David Cameron, was that Chinese money would come in and provide the capital for this, somewhere in the region of sort of 35 to 50 billion pounds, and the Chinese would get complete control of another nuclear reactor site. And MI5 came out and said, this is absolute madness, this cannot happen. And it turned into a big tussle. So the same thing has happened on this 5G thing. Thankfully, that the people voted with their feet in a recent election. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, will be considering alternative career options now, and not a moment too soon. I'm just really glad I'm an American, frankly, but we can save them because we've got a great solution now. So your question's a very good one. We have an all US secure supply chain solution that will absolutely be a great opportunity for all of America's allies to kind of jump on board with and provide a real alternative to that. Because that's how they're getting in. They're getting in because they're exploiting a cost-driven strategy, and they're the only opportunity in the room. So as our colleague from South Sudan has said, you can't beat something with nothing. If nobody else is there saying, hey, we've got this, then what are they to do? So I hope that answers your question.
Good. Adequately.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.